So, and this is, not me providing any sort of theory or anything like that from my side. It's just when working with the groups of queer practitioners, I do like to refer to the ancestral wisdom that's there for queer practitioners in Buddhism. And there's actually some, more than we would expect, probably, even though you have to really fish for it sometimes. But that's fairly common for many traditions that have existed for thousands of years. If you want to find something that's queer specific, you have to really look for it. But then if you do look for it, you can find amazing gems. And one of those gems, and that's kind of the first link in that queer Dharma resources list that I've mentioned, and I think we have the link already in Zoom, and for those who are there physically, we'll send it out. The very first link there is a wonderful quote from a master by the name of Garchen Rinpoche, who is one of the most renowned yogis of our time. Really an incredible, towering figure in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition for multiple reasons. One of them is that Garchen Rinpoche is a great holder of one of the Tibetan Buddhist lineages, yada, yada, yada. So just a very thoroughly trained and educated master from old Tibet. He now lives in Arizona, but he's historically... his lineage of teachings existed in Tibet proper for many, many years, and then eventually he came out into exile and is now teaching all across the world because there are many people joining the online teachings and also going to the Garchen Institute in Arizona physically. But another thing that's very famous about him is that he survived many, many years of concentration camp where he incredibly experienced and witnessed the most incredible and horrifying suffering associated with, of course, being in a concentration camp. And yet he emerged out of that as one of the most radiant, loving, wise, compassionate beings that I've ever encountered. I've had the great privilege of interpreting for his teachings on a number of occasions, and that was very powerful. And in general, Garchen Rinpoche's teachings, that's just context, just me providing translator context, I guess. In general, Garchen Rinpoche's teachings are very firmly focused on the idea of love and tenderness. He usually describes these qualities in union, and he uses a special Tibetan term, Jamtse, which is loving kindness plus tenderness combined. Jampa is loving kindness, the one we just did now in the previous session. Tsewa is that more foundational quality of tenderness. He often talks about their union, and he encourages his students and anyone who's willing to listen to train in this quality through meditation. So that's just the basic context. And he emphasizes this quality as a gateway towards us realizing the ultimate goals of Buddhism, which are to liberate our mind from all the fetters, all the obscurations, so that the boundless luminosity that's hidden within us can be fully uncovered and shine forth and bring all beings to happiness and freedom. So that's kind of the general idea. And on one occasion, this is something I discovered by accident, I would say, just because I was, I guess, surfing and the web, and yet it made a very powerful impression on me. And now I now read this out at almost every queer event when I get a chance, and I certainly read it out last year. So if you already heard it and you're like, oh, whatever, apologize in advance. But for me, it's almost a root tantra, or kind of a pith instruction, straight from the mind of one of the greatest yogis of our time. And this is what happened there. Garchen Rinpoche was teaching, I think, in Singapore, and he was leading a retreat in Singapore where people were reciting lots of mantras and doing lots of practices together related to visualization and other types of meditation. And he was also doing question and answer sessions. And in one of the question and answer sessions, someone asked a question which verbatim sounds like this. Please kindly advise how to handle problems regarding lesbians. So that's verbatim the question. How to handle problems regarding lesbians. So if you have problems regarding lesbians, you will find this very, very helpful right now. So there's three parts here. So the first one is just kind of live and let live. So the first thing that Rinpoche said is, actually, within the mind, there is no difference between male and female. If they have no difficulties with each other, don't get involved in that. There is nothing wrong with having a female partner. Actually, it is up to you. It is your choice. So, okay, live and let live, relax. Don't worry about others. Let them have whatever partner they want to have. Really, it's none of your business. And then he gives this amazing pith instruction on how loving kindness and tenderness can be used for recognizing the ultimate nature of reality. And because he is providing this within the context of his answer regarding problems regarding lesbians, I think this is a perfect pith instruction sort of for queer practitioners. And I'm in no way reading this out kind of as someone who's realized this in any way whatsoever, but because he's so clearly identifying the practice trajectory that can be used, I think it's really inspiring. So in the second part, kind of the second paragraph of it, he says, the point is, whichever partner you're with, the companion must be happy. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche, the founder of Jamyang, or one of the two founders of Jamyang, actually also on many occasions said that if you're with someone, you really should be with them because you have a wish to make them happy. There needs to be ideally that altruistic aspiration to make the partner happy. That's what will make the relationship healthy. Whereas if you're just trying to get something out of them, then that's not very sustainable. So the same idea here, the companion must be happy. So the way to make our mind happy is to cultivate love for one another. If you have great love, then it doesn't make a difference whether it is man or woman. So just normalizing it again, no big deal, doesn't matter. It is fine as long as you have love. Because if you have great love, your ordinary thoughts stop. So here Rinpoche is referring to this, once again, union of tenderness and loving kindness. And he's saying that if we were to cultivate this for a long period of time, if we truly to work with this quality, accumulating hours and then dozens and then hundreds and then thousands of hours of practice, at a stage which would be kind of more advanced than where we are as beginners, our ordinary thoughts will stop, just naturally under the influence of this power of love, which is a union of tenderness and loving kindness. When the thoughts stop, he says, you come to the actual nature of the mind, the real happiness, which is your true nature that is free from thoughts. So he's saying that we will, through that act of stopping we will stop our thoughts through the power of kindness or love fused with kindness, and then through that we will recognize the ultimate nature of the mind, which is in his tradition, the tradition of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, the ultimate nature of reality itself. So we'll arrive at that by having and cultivating this genuine love within the context of our relationship. And then, which is your true nature that is free from thoughts. So then, whether some partner is there or partner is not there, it makes no difference. Whenever you meditate, you rest within the state of great joy with happiness because that is the nature of your mind. That is the all good nature of the mind. The bliss you get from another person is only a condition, but not the innate nature of your mind. So actually, whichever partner you have, it is your own choice. So he's kind of giving this, what's known in Tibetan tradition as semtri, pointing out instruction or an instruction of the nature of the mind, but he's giving it within this context of queer relationships. And he's saying, well, if you are in a relationship, cultivate love, the fusion of tenderness and loving kindness. To the degree that you succeed in that, your ordinary thoughts will gradually start dissipating, and you will be seeing your own true nature more and more and more powerfully. And then eventually you arrive at the level where you're kind of self-sufficient in that there's no inner incompleteness that you need to feel with having or not having a partner, and you will be just naturally happy. But your connection to another person can serve as a condition for that, so you cultivate love. And then he says, that's the last bit here. So in brief, it is important to have love for one another. So think that this is actually a quality of love and treating others with kindness. So he's just telling us that, yeah, well, first of all, there are no problems regarding lesbians, or at least just not in general. Maybe there are some specific ones, specific problems that we have in our relationships, but in general, just live and let live. But also use whatever relationships we personally have to cultivate that quality of love and tenderness, because that will actually lead us to the true recognition of our ultimate nature and allow us to fulfill the very goals that the Buddha, who's so beautifully sitting on the altar there in Jamyang, set out as the ultimate goal of the path. So I think it's a very beautiful pith instruction. I'm coming back to it regularly and always trying to quote it to people so that they know that there is this incredible source on, which is a very pithy instruction on what it's like to practice as a queer practitioner. And then the metaphor that Rinpoche uses with regards to this is that when we practice any aspect of kindness, especially loving kindness, but also compassion, or empathetic joy, or equanimity, and tenderness also, which lies at the root of all of them, it's as if we're applying warmth to the ice of our incorrect grasping. So the ice is this incorrect perception of reality that we have, because our perception of reality is frozen. We see things as independently existent, which they're not, and then we see each other as enemies and opponents, and all these sorts of incorrect perceptions arise. But if we were to increase the level of warmth within our mind through practicing such methods as the four immeasurables, then slowly, some of that iciness would melt away. And this is kind of a relatively rare style of teaching these things. Garshan Rinpoche is a very famous representative of that, but there are some other teachers that I've encountered that use this style. And it's basically this idea that practicing the four immeasurables is not just a way of cultivating kindness, and then we have to go and cultivate wisdom, and that's a completely separate thing, completely unrelated to these trainings in kindness. No, here they say, to the degree that you succeed in the cultivation of love, some wisdom will also emerge. And of course, you can still strengthen that further, but there is this very powerful interconnectedness. So I think that's beautiful, and just something to put in the kind of a back burner of our mind if we wish to be inspired to continue practicing with these methods, which are also recommended here for queer practitioners by a towering authority, at least in the Tibetan lineage. But that's just kind of as an aside, and to complete this theme of loving kindness. I wish we had about 3 years in this retreat to deal with loving kindness properly, but since we don't, at least not yet, we'll move on to compassion. And we'll practice it, but just before that, a tiny note on the definition for those who are relatively new to these things. So while loving kindness is defined as a wish for beings to be happy and have the causes of happiness, and this last bit about the causes of happiness is especially added in the Tibetan tradition, compassion is defined as a wish for beings to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So compassion is tenderness when tenderness looks at the fact that someone is not well, that someone is actively suffering, whether that's us or someone else around us or all sentient beings. We see that something's not going well, and with the recognition of that, our tenderness then says, hey, may you be free. May you be free from this suffering and all the other types of suffering and the causes of that suffering. So tenderness crystallizes into compassion by attending to suffering and wanting for that suffering to eventually, through an interdependent gradual process, to be removed. And that's also obviously a very beautiful response to have that we add on top of loving kindness. So if by default, that's how it's sometimes described, we manage to maintain the baseline of loving kindness towards everyone we encounter, we see them and immediately there's some tenderness and a wish for them to even flourish. That's loving kindness. When we see someone actively suffering, those states of tenderness and loving kindness transform into a fusion of tenderness and compassion. And we say spontaneously, oh no, may you get better. May the suffering be dispelled. And then if something can actually be done, we do it almost spontaneously because we've made our compassion very strong. So it pushes us into this behavioral response naturally. But if nothing can be done at the moment, at least there's that aspiration for suffering to eventually be removed through, once again, an interdependent process where slowly we remove the knots of causation, of causality that bring about the suffering. So that's the general idea there, and we cultivate compassion in a way that's very similar to the cultivation of loving kindness. We perform all the preliminary steps of relaxing and so forth, establishing a degree of relaxation, then ideally we would already have some connection to our tenderness. And because Tibetans historically had a very good connection to tenderness, they did not really talk about any additional steps for invoking that. But because some of us might feel a certain disconnect there, we sometimes can integrate tenderness into our practice more consciously, more deliberately. And then with that, we start actively contemplating our own suffering and the suffering of others. But not from a kind of point of view of despair, which is described as the false facsimile of compassion or its near enemy, rather with an optimistic view of interdependence that says, hey, there's always something that can be slowly changed because everything is interdependent, and this interdependent reality can be rebraided. Things can be changed because we can pull at these threads, remove these knots, push here, push there. Slowly, it will all transform. So it's with that attitude that we'll practice a little bit of compassion, first for ourselves and then for other beings. So an act of compassion for ourselves that we can perform before going into the actual meditation is once again making sure we're comfortable. So that might include stretching and drinking some water and just making sure everything is going well with our body. And then eventually, slowly transitioning into the position that we want to use for this practice. And so eventually finding a comfortable stationary position, allowing our mind to go into the depths of the body and mentally touching the ground that's holding us. Our body and mind are an interdependent system, but this interdependent system, our body, is an extension of a much larger interdependent system that is this planet. So allowing ourselves to feel connected to all who live and to the planet that's holding us. And from amongst the multiplicity of qualities that this planet has, inviting in particular the quality of profound restfulness, and allowing it to flow into our body as we perform our preliminary abbreviated body scan. Spending some time with our feet and toes, and then our legs in general. Then exploring our pelvic floor, and the space of our torso. Our shoulders, and our hands. And finally, our facial muscles. And then extending our awareness to the entirety of the body, and for a little while enjoying the dance between our body and the breath, or the element of air that's invited into our body as we breathe. Allowing it to gently wash away all the types of tension and all the types of restlessness. And then for a little while, seeking to reconnect to the foundational attitude of tenderness, or warmth, or caring, that we can offer to our body and mind, to ourselves as a being, by simply attending to our current experiences with an air of tenderness. Or by imagining that we're holding ourselves as if we were holding a baby or a kitten or a puppy. Or thinking that we're looking at ourselves through the eyes of a friend or of a truly realized being. Where that flow of warmth is uninterrupted and is offered to us as an object, as a gentle cloud surrounding our body and mind. A giant energetic embrace. If we wish, we can use the breath as an additional tool, inviting these waves of tenderness with each inhalation, allowing them to surround us with each exhalation, or just resting with the flow of tenderness without thinking about the breath at all. And then to slowly move on to the practice of compassion. We, without losing touch with the foundational quality of tenderness, recognize the simple fact that we do, on occasion, experience different types of suffering. And some of them might be present in our body or mind right now. Maybe there's some physical discomfort right there, or a sense of worry and even anxiety with regards to some issues in our life. Or some situation that's bothering us that's also a cause of suffering. But in this case, not focusing on the specifics, rather just recognizing that there are these unfortunate, unpleasant experiences. They always have causes. They arise dependently. And because they have causes, they can be changed, reduced, and removed. Everything that is interdependent can be affected through that interdependence, through skillful work with the systems. And since this is so, we can, with full confidence, actually say, may I be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. Offering this powerful wish to ourselves on the basis, the foundational quality of tenderness. May I be free from suffering and the causes that bring it about. May I be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. Once again, this is where the breath can serve as an ally. If we wish, we can strengthen this wish for freedom with each exhalation, or just sometimes on occasion when we feel the need to reignite the wish and make it more focused. And this is where we can also recognize that while there are some types of suffering that come from the outside that are hedonically generated, some types of our discomfort come from the way our mind is currently organized or configured. There are certain things that oppose our inner or eudaimonic well-being, and through our work with interdependence, those can be removed. The obstacles to happiness can be removed. Along with the types of suffering that they bring about. So may I be free on all these levels. Resting with this wish for just one more minute. May I be free. Free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And then we release all images, all aspirations, all wishes to just rest in awareness without a particular reference point. But maybe with the afterglow of compassion. And then we come back to our body, perceiving its sensations through the lens of compassionate and tender awareness. And then we slowly introduce some movements to the body to transition out of this practice. Thank you. So just a tiny break to stretch and move around. And while that's happening, just going to say some more nonsense. Just another story now that I've quoted the one about Garchen Rinpoche. And it's a story that I really love. It's a story from the Tibetan tradition, and the Tibetan tradition from amongst the four immeasurables especially emphasizes compassion. This is where the Sanskrit tradition and the Pali tradition, the two major textual branches of Buddhism, are kind of slightly different from each other, because the Pali tradition and all of its derivatives, even the modern insight meditation movement in the United States, the Pali tradition really places pretty firm emphasis on loving kindness, because it's the first immeasurable anyway. And in the Tibetan tradition, all the immeasurables and all the associated states are often summarized under the umbrella term of compassion. Compassion is used both for compassion itself, which is the thing we're practicing with, and also to describe all the pro-social states. And so in the 10th century, the Tibetan tradition was reignited and restructured by a great Indian master by the name of Atisha. Those who are studying in Jamyang on a regular basis would probably be extremely familiar with Atisha's teachings. He's a towering figure once again. Indian himself, originally a prince, and then a monastic and a yogi, and an incredible scholar who came to Tibet and kind of sacrificed his life to reestablish the correct order of practicing the teachings and to introduce many amazing teachings that we use to this day. And at one point, Atisha, when he was in Tibet towards the end of his life, was having a friendly conversation with his Tibetan students. And he really trained a plethora of very, very wonderful practitioners. And at one point, they came together to ask him, well, if you were to summarize the entirety of the Dharma, the entirety of these Buddhist teachings that are meant to protect us from suffering and bring us to happiness, if you were to summarize it all in one point, just one thing that includes them all, what would that thing be? So that's kind of a provocative question. There are many answers to that question, and I've heard very different answers from different lineages, different traditions, different authors, different masters. But Atisha took a pause, and then he said, great compassion, Mahakaruna. Great compassion would be the answer, because great compassion includes everything else. If you're truly practicing compassion in a very proper way, it would include wisdom, because you can't have true compassion without systemic vision and vision of systems and interdependence. So you would need that to have actual compassion. And then it would also entail loving kindness and tenderness, and the rest of the gang, they would also have to be there. But why compassion above them all? Why it's emphasized? Well, it's said in the Tibetan tradition, once again, that if we truly cultivate compassion, which is this wish to remove all the sources of suffering, and then if we make it come true, if we realize the aspiration of compassion by actually removing suffering and the causes of suffering, just naturally, because all the sources of suffering are removed, happiness will also emerge. So you don't need to, separately work on cultivating happiness after you've removed the suffering. So happiness will naturally emerge, and all the other beautiful qualities will flourish, because compassion will once again have this ennobling effect on our mind, melting the ice of our grasping, so that all the beautiful things flow through. So that's a story that one of my primary teachers, Chökyi Rinpoche, very, very often recounts. He's a childhood friend of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and I think they're quite aligned, or they were quite aligned with each other in that regard, because both spend their entire lives emphasizing these training in compassion, the quality of compassion, even though compassion in this case actually includes all of the four immeasurables. So there's just something on the beauty and importance of this quality. It's not trivial at all. And we actually see this now as Buddhism gets used for the development of modern therapeutic and mindfulness-oriented approaches, many of the ones that have been developed in particular in the last 20 years, including CCT, which is Thupten Jinpa's compassion cultivation training, or sustainable compassion training, or CBCT, which is cognitively based compassion training or compassion-based cognitive training. All of these approaches use compassion in their name and focus on it as the central quality, kind of pushing mindfulness to the sides, really, as just a technical tool that we need in order to arrive at compassion. And then compassion actually solves all the problems if it is infused with wisdom. So that's a very interesting shift even on that level. So with that, I hope we have inspired ourselves to practice some more compassion, and we'll do another meditation, in this case extending compassion not just to ourselves but also to some of the others around us and eventually to all beings. And yet the first act of compassion here is to make sure our body is comfortable. So if we need to stretch or take a sip of water, let's do that, and then slowly arrive at our chosen position. And before we even start relaxing the body, performing body scans and all that, it's actually sometimes helpful to just remind ourselves, I'm doing this because I do care. I do have that foundational warmth towards myself, towards others. I'm curious maybe about uncovering the fullness of the love that I'm capable of. So that's why I'm here, training in these beautiful qualities. And to train in them, I first need a foundation of stillness, silence, and spaciousness. So bringing our awareness to the depths of the body, mentally touching the ground, feeling that firmness and stability there. And performing an abbreviated body scan to make sure that the qualities of relaxation and stability are equally present in all of the main body parts. Starting with our feet and toes, and then exploring our legs in general. Our torso, our shoulders, upper arms, hands, fingers. And then our face. Watching the sensations of our body, and while doing that, also offering some tenderness, first to the body, and we can do that even through the sense of physical touch, projecting tenderness through the tips of our fingers into the depths of the body. Knowing that the process of breathing can also be a trigger for an experience of tenderness. After all, nature is very kindly keeping us alive and nourished. And then on the basis of that, very gently, without going into the details of it all, reminding ourselves that, yes, indeed, there are some uncomfortable experiences in our life. There's some physical discomfort. There's mental and emotional discomfort that we experience sometimes. And equally, there are triggering situations. Some of them personal, some communal, some related to the current state of the world. And yet, all of it is a dependent arising, all of it exists contextually within a specific system of causality, all of it can be affected in small and large ways. And then our tenderness can say, "May I be free from suffering." May I be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. That last bit can be added to remind us that suffering arises dependently and therefore can be changed. And while maintaining this flow of compassion for ourselves, our body, our mind, really the entirety of our existence, we can recognize that there are others around us, and every person physically there or digitally there, in real time or asynchronously, every person has some type of suffering as well. Some of them very temporary, like the discomfort in our knees. And some types of suffering would be pretty foundational, the existential suffering that Buddhists describe as us being in samsara, in this contaminated existence. Well, may we be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. Every time we come back to the wish, and with every moment of maintaining the wish, we're planting the seeds of compassion more firmly in our shared field of interdependence and in our personal cognitive field, our field of desires and wishes. So there will always be a result, at least in terms of us becoming more compassionate in our personal and communal behavior. May we be free, free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And then for a little while, at least aspirationally, we can tackle the most global level where all beings arrive at freedom together. And this is where, if we are, for example, troubled by the state of the world, if we are strongly disagreeing with the moral position of some people in this world and so forth, compassion is the perfect response, because if all the causes of suffering, including pathological greed and short-sighted ignorance and so forth, if all of that were to be removed, we would all be much freer and there would be much more happiness for everyone involved. So compassion here can be as fierce as it needs to be and as gentle as it needs to be. And it can be equally extended to all who live in this world and beyond. So with this global vision, we can truly keep wishing, may all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. Just resting with this wish for one more minute. Then releasing it to just rest in open spaciousness and maybe the afterglow of compassion. And then coming back to our body with some tender awareness directed towards our tactile sensations right now. Then introducing a tiny bit of movement. And slowly concluding the practice. So we have 10 minutes before lunch, and I just wanted to give us at least 10 minutes of actual journaling time that's not combined with the need to run to the toilet and stand in a line. So I'll show you a couple of questions related to compassion that you're very welcome to journal on. But also, if you want to journal on any of the preceding themes that we have discussed today, absolutely. If there was something useful to you in these stories about Atisha or in this quote from Garchen Rinpoche, also anything that might have been inspiring, or you're just very welcome to just sit there and draw flowers or, I don't know, trees. Also very meaningful, just releasing that creative side, that luminous aspect of our mind, and drawing lots of pretty flowers. Absolutely. So just to spend some minutes together doing that, as if we were in kindergarten, and then at the end of the hour we can actually go have lunch, or in my case breakfast. So let's do that, and I'll just project the questions. So there are 3 here. How can I offer consistent compassion to myself? How can I make my compassion more universal? How can I consider the systems of interdependence in every situation that requires compassion? So really anything that comes to mind, obviously, even if it's just flowers and trees. Well, it seems like there's only 1 minute left before the hour, so please feel free to enjoy your lunch. And if you want to have um, a conversation during lunch about some of this stuff, well, there are three qualities that we have played with on top of relaxation: tenderness, loving kindness, and compassion. And oftentimes, people, even in talking about the presence of tenderness in their lives and whether it's easy to connect to that quality and experience it consistently, even that is usually a pretty fruitful discussion if that's something you're interested in. But also to recognize that some people just want to keep quiet. Introverts probably want to be left alone, like me, during lunch. So, do whatever feels right, be tender with yourselves, enjoy the break, and we'll see each other in an hour. Thank you so much, and bon appetit.